Hello and welcome back to my channel. Look at me, I made a book video. It's been a while. I have once again accumulated an unreasonable amount of books. I told myself like, oh, maybe I have enough to do like a little book haul or something, just a small one. It's never a small one. When is it ever a small one? A couple of these books, by the way, I have already read. I don't know with what time I have managed to do this, but it's happened. I'm genuinely starting to worry about the space I have on the shelf now, to the point where I bought something. They had an edition of it in the Penguin Classics that I have. They had an edition in the Vintage Classics that I have. But I decided to not buy it in either of those editions, buy it in a separate edition so that it didn't have to go on this shelf because it wouldn't have fit. So we, once again, have a problem. The hobby of buying books, I think I've said this before, is so divorced from the, like, you know, the reading of said books. It's a library. I'm just acquiring things for my library. It's fine. Anyway, should we take a look? Okay, this is continuously getting heavier as time goes on. We're gonna go top down. We're gonna go, not that size matters, but we're gonna go top down. Right. Space. Mood-wise at the moment, I've not been reading anything too heavy or like heavy philosophy or anything like that. I've just kind of gone back to fiction for a good little while. I read a bunch of things but they were just older and they were a little bit more complicated, and I just kind of wanted something that was like more fun fiction. And also when you buy things that are more modern, they're much easier to read and you just get through it faster because the language is what you're used to, the reference points are more familiar, so you just kind of blast through that and it's like makes you feel better. So that's kind of a theme I went with for this lot as well as buying a couple of things that, like, all of these are authors that I've already read or bits of or have heard so many people speak about that I'm like, it's ridiculous that I don't own this. Or buying people that I already know, or buying things to like complete my, not complete my, but you know when you feel like you have a hole in your collection where you're like, there should be something here and I know what it's supposed to be. That's where it's at. There's a range. We have philosophy, book, novels, and we even have some poetry. So let's start with the top of this pile. I bought some more Calvino. Honestly, Calvino does something to my soul. Calvino is just playful. Everything that I've read of Calvino's has been so fun and playful, and that's why I was like, I need more. So I bought one of the short, the Penguin one, short one. This was £1 whole. So if you're like, I need to not spend money on books, you can buy these. You can also find this as a PDF. This was Calvino, The Distance of the Moon. This is a couple short stories of his that are more like, I was gonna say cosmopolitan. Cosmological? Is that a word? I think I may have made that up. These exuberant, endlessly innovative stories interweave scientific fact with wordplay, whimsy, and cosmic flights of fancy in a strange and wondrous universe. Things that are set in space, that like human relationship to space in the way that we can't. The way that we cannot conceive of such large amounts of time or large amounts of space. And he's sort of playing with how big time in the universe is, time and space are basically. So it's like, it gives you so much scope to just write whatever you want because our brains aren't really gonna conceive of it anyway. We're just not built to imagine infinity. So he kind of plays with that and like how, like as an essence or like as a, not necessarily as a person, but like how as a being your mind can like understand things over those kind of time periods. So it's a lot of like space and the stars and about how you sort of live in and around them. The title one is about the moon, sort of like folklore-ish. Kind of feels like a kid's book, but it's not a kid's book. I feel like that's a lot of Calvino, is it feels like it could be for children, but it's not. So there's a lot of like still youthful playfulness, so much of what he writes, and that's why I've already read it, as you can tell. I've already read this, but like that's why I like Calvino. He's always more playful, he's always more fun. Reading him feels like you're reading a grown-up who just refused to stop like being a child, but like in that imaginative, run away with everything kind of sense. That's one of the reasons I love Calvino so much, so I was like, I need more. Did Emma read this? Wow. What do you have? Distance of the Moon, Without Colours, As Long as the Sun Lasts, and Implosion. And I rate all of them. I think you can probably find them all as PDFs places because they're really short, but as a little collection together and for £1. I personally don't think you can go wrong. Also, if you've never read any Calvino, these are just such good little introductions, because they're not necessarily the best things the authors have ever, like, I have a bunch of them over here. They're not necessarily the best things the authors have ever written, not by a long stretch, but they're like a good gateway drug, and a bunch of these from this series are actually written by people who don't necessarily write. I have some from Andy Warhol, which is nice. They're good little like introduction tasters. I really highly recommend them, highly rate them, and I especially rate this. I just love Calvino. And you know, while we're on the topic of Calvino, this is the other thing that I bought. I actually didn't look at this cover very well. This is quite a cool cover. I bought The Baron in the Trees by Calvino. Mum had always said when I was reading If on a Winter's Night's Traveller, this was like the next sort of one that you should read, but it was like, oh, this guy lives in the trees the whole time. So I was in Dawn and I was like looking through like all of the like Calvino and I couldn't find it. I was like, where's the one where he lives in the fucking trees? It was somewhere else. I don't know, because I was like, I want something else and I want something like Calvino, but this was a specific one and I cannot find it, so I can't bring myself to buy anything else because like I wanted that one. So I got this one. From the age of 12, the Baron Cosimo Pio Vasco di Ronda makes his home among ash, elm, magnolia, plum and almond, living up in the trees. He walks through paths made from twisted branches of olive. He makes his bed in holly oak, bathes in a fountain constructed from poplar bark. An aerial library holds the books with which he educates himself in philosophy and mathematics. Suspended among the leaves, the Baron adventures with bandits and pirates, conducts a passionate love affair, and watches the age of enlightenment pass beneath him. This is a playful romantic fable by one of 20th century's master storytellers. This is why I love Calvino. I always find that people seem to think that literature is dead serious so often. It's one of the reasons so many people don't read classics, and that's part of my agenda, is being like, look, that's not what classics is. You just have to read the good stuff. You've just been forced to read bad and boring stuff by your English teacher who you didn't necessarily like that much, but there's so much good stuff out there. I'm currently, you'll hear about this in a different video, but I'm currently reading Orlando, and one of the reasons I avoided Virginia Woolf for so long was because some of my friends had to study To the Lighthouse and they all hated it. I remember so many people complaining about it the entire time, so I kind of like avoided Woolf, her fiction, for a long time, and now I'm like, look, Orlando is wonderful. It feels like reading Calvino does, just because it doesn't take itself seriously. Like, things can be incredible works of literature, but they don't need to take themselves seriously. Very, very few things actually do when you get down and read them, because you kind of have to remember what like poets like and what authors like. They're not necessarily that serious as people. If you've ever met anybody who does like any arts, you'll know what I mean. I feel like this is a weird pop culture version of what writers, poets, authors are like, what artists are like. People aren't serious, in my opinion, in my experience. But Calvino is so fun. So much of You just not want me to talk about Calvino? So much of what Calvino writes feels like it should be kids stuff. It's always very folklore, it's always very fun, it's always very playful, and I'm assuming that I wolf down his books. They are just so fun, and you just feel like you know you're reading something special. And it's kind of that mix of like, you know you're reading something good, but it's also fun and playful. It's also fun and playful. It's not an Emma book video if I don't drop my books. But you just feel like you're reading something that is fantastic, and also you'll kind of have that edge of like, I'm also reading something that's like classics and studied, so it's like a double whammy of like good, but also like good. So that's what I have to say about this. For fuck's sake, I'm not shutting that window. It's too damn hot. Next up, I finally, cannot believe finally bought Susan Sontag on photography. I have her book on Regarding the Pain of Others. These are both essays on photography, but more like as an ethics standpoint, at least Regarding the Pain of Others is, which I actually read before this, so I feel like you should do it the other way around. If you're going to read them both, but read on photography first. Susan Sontag's groundbreaking critique of photography asks forceful questions about the morality and aesthetic issues surrounding this art form. Photographers are everywhere. They have the power to shock, idealize, or seduce. They create a sense of nostalgia and act as memorial, and they can be used as evidence against us or to identify us. Here Sontag examines the ways in which we use these omnipresent images to manufacture a sense of reality and authority in our lives. In a social media age, we all have a camera in our pocket. There has never ever been a better time to read this, because it hasn't this is how you can characterize a classic, is by something that you can read it over and over again and keep getting things out of it, but also historically you just keep printing it because it keeps being relevant. This is absolutely one of those. I want to make a video of like books for filmmakers, which is, it sounds contradictory, but I feel like this would be one of them. If you do anything in visual arts, this is, well yeah, just even if you post anything, if you post photos to any public forum, read this. We don't discuss necessarily things like the aesthetics alongside the morality as much as we like should, because there are interesting ethical like things to discuss, and like especially when you, I'm basing my opinion right now off the fact that I've read Regarding the Pain of Others, because especially like with things like photojournalism, you can't not capture the bad stuff too, but then how do you do that in a way that is still respectful and considered, and more than anything not exploitative? It's so easy for images, because they become, you know, they have value, they have financial value, so it's like how do you do what you're doing in like the art sense, but then not do shit that is like ethically deeply questionable, because there is always going to be a financial sense involved. Art and money, like it's business like anything else, and I think often we want to put the arts and stuff on a pedestal, but none of this happens without any of the financial backing down here. But you know, we've never taken as many photos as we do right now. Look on your camera roll, how many photos did you take just today? So in terms of just us all getting a little bit better at photography would be nice. I've seen so many horrible pictures. I'm like, you could have made that so much nicer if you just done a little couple basic tweaks to it. I was explaining to a friend recently, like, this is a shitty example, but I showed her this is just what my camera opened as. This is what I then adjusted my picture to just look like. One looks significantly better than the other, and one of them took half a second and half a brain cell to just adjust. For the sake of all of our eyeballs, a little bit of a practical guide is not amiss, but also in the sense of our souls and them not being completely destroyed and obliterated by social media. But when I posted this on my story, a lot of you DM'd me straight away being like, that was fantastic. So I'm really, really looking forward to reading this. Everything I've read of Sontag's, I've really enjoyed. I seem to vibe very well with her philosophies and stuff. I even follow his Twitter account, which is just tweeting lines from Susan Sontag's diary. So, but yeah, I've always vibed with Sontag, so I'm very happy to read. Arguably her most important work, aside from probably Notes on Camp, which I also have, so I'm excited about this. Up next, I bought James Baldwin. Finally. I was literally like stood in here and I was sort of looking at my bookcase like, where is it? I swear I had some. I was so dead sure that I had at least one of Baldwin's books. No, somehow I was like, this is just like me buying stuff because I'm like, I can't believe I don't have it. The same with the Sontag, the same with the Calvino. I'm like, what do you mean I don't own a copy of this? What do you mean I'm actually realizing I've actually not read that? So there are just things that I feel like if you are as involved, this is just one of those, you know? David, a young American in 1950s Paris, is waiting for his fiancée to return from vacation in Spain, but when he meets Giovanni, a handsome Italian barman, the two men are drawn into an intense affair. After 3 months, David's fiancée returns, and denying his true nature, David rejects Giovanni's for a safe future as a married man. His decision eventually brings tragedy. Full of passion, regret and longing, this story of a fated love triangle has become a landmark in gay writing, but its appeal is broader. James Baldwin caused outrage as a black author writing about white homosexuals, yet for him the issues of race, sexuality and personal freedom were internally intertwined. I'm so excited to read this. I have been meaning to make a video on just like queer book recs. I've been meaning to do it. I've been meaning to do a film version. Leave any recommendations that you have for those lists down below or DM me with them. But I've been meaning to do that and I cannot wait to read this. I was literally just in the bookshop like going through like my Goodreads and then like I'll find Baldwin. I was like, yeah, obviously I want some Baldwin. And like going through like, because you can obviously see what people have rated the highest, and this is one of them, or the one they've rated the highest. I'm like, yes, and also it's not that long, so I felt like whenever you get into reading someone new, in my case, I always try and aim for like the sweet spot between like the highest rated thing but also like the shortest thing. If the best thing that they have that's rated is like 600 pages, probably not. I mean, the exception to that is absolutely The Secret History, but that was great anyway, so that was a good gamble. But yeah, I'm just excited to read Baldwin, and like last year with all of the waves of Black Lives Matter protests, there were so many reading lists, and he was basically on top of pretty much every single like fiction one, which was just a good reminder to read him, and I was like, now I finally have some of his books, which is I think why I was so convinced that I already had some of them. But yeah, here we are. My last term, I'm currently doing my 4th term of film school. My last term of film school we did a documentary term, and our supervisor that we had for on our shoot, because I was producing, so I wasn't like behind the camera, so I was just doing all the organisational stuff, which meant that I was not doing much when we were actually shooting. So I got to speak to our COVID supervisor a lot, and she was reading not this one of Baldwin's, a different one. I think it was this one, I cannot remember, but she said it was really, really good. We have more books and just any more of Penguin Modern Classics, because I do still have space for them over here. Just, there's like this much space of books that I have left. Oh, I'm gonna get through my space and then I'm gonna have to beg my mother for another bookshelf, which I'd be shocked if she denied me. You know, let's continue the gay theme. That's right. Girls, gays, theys. We did it, Joe! I finally bought Carol, The Price of Salt, finally, by Patricia Highsmith. Why did I say Higgins? Carol. If you haven't seen the film, what rock do you live under? Watch the film, and don't... I feel like sometimes people can be put off by the whole like, oh, it's queer, so then I'm like, it's just a fantastic film. And it's funny because like, when I initially watched it, I was kind of underwhelmed by it. But like every time I've gone back in my memory, it's just, I need to leave it a little bit before I rewatch it, because I definitely do need to rewatch it. But like every single time I think back to it, I think more highly of it, which is weird because when I finished watching it, I was kind of underwhelmed, but I feel like as time's gone on, I kind of get it more and more and more. Sign of a good film is that you can't stop thinking about it, and every time you revisit it, you're like, ah. But yeah, I finally bought the book. Finally brought the book. She also wrote The Talents of Mr. Ripley, so I feel like maybe I'm gonna read that, but apparently the film of that's quite good too. But I'm super psyched to just have this, because I was like, why do I not have this? Again, this is one of those I'm like, how do I not have this? Therese is just an ordinary sales assistant working in New York department store when a beautiful, alluring woman in her 30s walks up to her counter. Standing there, Therese is wholly unprepared for the first shock of love. Therese is an awkward 19-year-old with a job she hates and a boyfriend she doesn't love. Carol is a sophisticated, bored suburban housewife in the throes of a divorce and custody battle for her only daughter. As Therese becomes irresistibly drawn into Carol's world, she soon realises how much they both stand to lose. First published pseudonymously. Dyslexic. In 1952 as The Price of Salt, Carol is a hauntingly atmospheric love story set against the backdrop of 50s New York. Yeah, that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to read this first and then I wanted to rewatch the film, because I just felt like it moved too quickly, but maybe that's because the sense of time in the film wasn't as clear as I felt like it should have been. And then if you're reading this and you get a sense of how much time they actually spend together, I think the emotional weight of the film is heavier. So I just think the concept of time in the film was lost on me, because I know that had I put in as much time mentally in the film as I feel like the film wanted to do, the impact of their relationship is harder because the stakes feel higher. Does that? Yeah, I don't know. I'm excited to read this because again, it felt like it was part of my collection, and certainly because like doing film and stuff, this is such an acclaimed film that me not having seen it was ridiculous. So then I was, well, I'm like, me not having read it is ridiculous. So I feel like this is kind of the theme of this little book haul, isn't it? It's like completing a collection a little bit. It's like finding those blind and blank spots in your library where you're like, and your brain and your soul, where you're like, what do you mean I don't own this? What do you mean I haven't read this? What do you mean I don't have a copy that I have annotated half to bloody death in love? So what? I have a fair amount of like gay stuff, but a lot of it is men or Willem, and I would like some more Willem. So I will try and do a video on like gay and queer X. If tell me anything you want on your list. I'm also currently reading Orlando, and I'm so happy. I cannot. No, I'm gonna save that for the next video. This is just a book haul, but I'm currently reading Orlando and I cannot put it down. It's fantastic. Anyway, next. I bought some Keats. I bought a book of poetry. When was the last bloody time I bought poetry? Poetry is so one of those things you are forced to analyse and read when you're doing your GCSEs, and we all hate it because we're like, this is bullshit. But then you become an adult and you're like, I'm going to buy some poetry. I bought Keats. For those of you who don't know, technically I went to KCL, I went to King's, so did Keats. So I was like, this feels like full circle to an extent in my education, but I really liked this edition. There was a Vintage Classics one, there was a Penguin Classics one. I bought this one so that it fits on my shelf. So this is all of his poems, because he died when he was, what, 25? I'm 23, so I kind of feel like I should read all of his poetry. I want to aim to have read, or at least all the famous ones, by the time I'm 25, because then you can kind of match. In a lot of ways you can't, obviously, because of historical, like the pace in which we live our lives now, blah blah blah. But I kind of want to match his pace in that. Despite his tragically short life, John Keats, a self-confessed rebel angel, endures for many as a personification of the Romantic age. While contemporary critics mocked him as a Cockney poet and an uneducated lower-class apothecary who aspired to poetry, subsequent generations began to see and appreciate both the rich and impassioned sensuousness and the love of beauty and liberty that pervade his work. So this is all of his poems and it's arranged chronologically. And this was clearly meant to be because one of his like earlier poems is For Emma. Keats's poetry just seems that when I opened it and flicked through it, like this is, English sounds so good in iambic pentameter and couplets. These are the facts. Alexandrian couplets, heroic couplets, Alexandrian couplets, heroic couplets. I'm weirdly good at writing them myself, by the way. I once had to do that for an English class. I did mine, I did my boyfriend at the times, and my friend's homework, because I was like, this is fun. Anyway, and when thou art weary, I'll find thee a bed of mosses and flowers to pillow thy head. There beauteous Emma, I'll sit at your feet, while my story of love I enraptured repeat. I rest my case. But yeah, I went through online and sort of googled best Keats poems, most famous Keats poems, and marked them out in the contents. So I've kind of like marked out which are meant to be the really, really good ones. So I'll go through, and then whenever, because you know I annotate my books half to bloody death, but that's how it should be, by the way. It just helps that I can like circle the ones that I've read and like rate them. That's actually what I do in my paperback copy of Montaigne's essays, because otherwise I'm not going to remember what I've read. I feel like I've resisted the Romantics for a long time. I resisted them for a long time until I studied them properly at uni, and then kind of really got to grips with them. I do have a soft spot for Byron, who's over there, that I'm not going to bring out because it's quite a big copy. I have a soft spot for them, but my heart will always belong to the Enlightenment. But the reality is we are never going to be fully rational human beings. All of our decisions are emotional to a degree. There's nothing we can do about that, and I think the Romantics are super aware of that, while the Enlightenment is so in denial of that. So I've read a couple and I'm excited to read more. Next, this kind of tripped me out, because I was like, this is so perfect for me that it's weird. This is a copy, an English copy of Madame de Lafayette, La Princesse de Clèves? The Princess de Clèves. So, guess who it's translated by? Yeah, it's translated by Nancy Mitford. I saw that and I was like, what the fuck? I'd already bought it and I was like, what? I have a French copy. Do I have a French copy of Princesse de Montpensier or de Clèves? I can't remember. But I have a French copy of one of them, a folio copy of one of them. But I'm currently reading with great difficulty, but doing it. So I was like, I need an English copy as well. I think this is the wrong one though. Yeah, 16th century stuff. It's these periods of like I've talked about it many times in Montaigne. It's these periods in France of like deep religious strife and a lot of war and a lot of bloodshed. It's also pre that centralisation of power in Versailles that you see with Louis XIV. It's still quite feudal. You have a king, but it's still feudal in that sense. This is like what the romantics think they are. Like, this feels so much more romantic, and it's definitely romanticised, of course it is. You know, you're a king in your castle, blah 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 blah, Duke of your lands, or instead of being like summoned now to Versailles and then having to go back to your castle with absolute exile, back to your lands with exile, because everybody wanted to be in Versailles, but that's like pre all of that. Always be civil to the girls. You never know whom they might marry. When a young beautiful Mademoiselle de Chartres comes to court, her primary objective is to find herself a husband. Upon her mother's recommendations, she accepts the advances of the Prince de Clèves, a rather average sort of man. Unfortunately, soon after the wedding, she finds herself to be in love with the dashing Duc de Nemours. Like, you don't need to read these dumb fantasy like YA things because it's also not new. Like, none of that is new. We've been doing stuff like that for the last 500 years. It's a trope for a reason, but Madame de Lafayette did do it first. Defo give this a read if any of that sounds your thing. I'm just excited to read it because I love pretty princesses, and that's kind of all I would have preferred to have been a pretty princess, but I will settle for whatever the hell it is I'm actually doing because I don't really know. But yeah, Madame de Lafayette, I'm pleased to have a copy of her in English. Her stuff is just my vibe, so yeah. And then, you will have seen this in a vlog, hopefully. It's that vlog. I was very, very kindly sent a beautiful, 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 beautiful copy of Montaigne's essays by Folio Society. Look, oh, look at I felt absolutely giddy opening this. I was like, what depths has this little book gremlin crawled from? This is a beautiful copy of Michel de Montaigne's essay that Folio Society sent me. Thank you again so much. I'll link them down below. They basically do beautiful copies of books. So honestly, I can't recommend having a good look through their catalogue enough, because chances they have your favourite book in a beautiful edition, and it's very hard to say no to. It's just gorgeous. I'm cracking it. And I get the impression that I'm not allowed to write in this one, am I? No. Even though I have Michel de Montaigne's essays and I've written all over them, this is just, it's just nice to have a special edition of something that you love so much, because it's just nice. But you know, if you have a friend's birthday coming up and you know their favourite book, check if they have it, because they might do, and that's just like, I don't know. It's very sentimental, and they have a lot of very, very beautiful editions of kids' books as well, which it's a good thing that I don't have any, because otherwise that's kind of what I'd be buying them, like, oh, have these cute little books. I still remember this really nice edition of Winnie the Pooh that I had as a child, so don't underestimate the power that a pretty book can have on a young child. Again, thank you so much, Folio Society. I will link them down below. They've just been nothing but lovely. And this is nothing but gorgeous. But there we are. I should probably put this back in the cover, shouldn't I, before I break it? But there we have it. That is my latest round of acquisitions. I was like, oh, I haven't bought that much. And then I had a look at how much I'd actually acquired, and I was like, whoops. Can you imagine I only dropped one book this entire video? But there we are, another book haul, because I, as we know, have a problem. But you know what? There are worse problems. Ow! That really just, ow, that really hurt. There are absolutely worse things to be spending your money on. If this happens to just be what I can live with this. I can live with this. But there we are. Let me know what you guys have bought recently. Let me know if you've read any of these, which ones you really, really rate. If you've read any of these authors, what your favourite ones are. Let me know. You can always follow me on Goodreads to figure out what I'm reading at the moment. You can always watch my vlogs to keep up, because I usually tell you straight up in the vlogs what I've bought and stuff, and if I've finished reading anything. So if you want to know, you can find there first. Come say hi on my socials. I'm quite busy with school at the moment, so I can't update on here very often. That's about it. As always, thank you so much for watching. Like, subscribe and all that jazz, and I will see you guys very, very soon. Goodbye. and endlessly innovative stories into. I cannot do this right now, and I do.